Hi guys, welcome back to the Financial Interest YouTube channel. My name's Dan. So recently I've been looking to develop my own checklist for investing, and what I'm currently using as a framework for investing is Phil Town's 4M's approach. Recently I came across an interview from Bill Ackman, which was last year, and in that he outlined his 8 principles for successful investing. So I thought I'd take a look over those and see how they compare with Phil Town's and also Charlie Munger's. So let's get on with the video. So Bill Ackman is a hedge fund manager, and he's actually the CEO and founder of Pershing Square Capital Management. And we can just look at some of the holdings for Pershing Square Capital Management in their last 13F filing. So here we can see they hold Lowe's, Agilent Technology, Chipotle Mexican Grill, Hilton Worldwide, Restaurant Brands International, Howard Hughes Corporation, and Domino's Pizza. So they're some of the major holdings for Pershing Square Capital Management. So now I'm going to jump into Bill Ackman's 8 principles straight away, and then we'll come back and look at each one in a little bit more detail. So firstly, the business should be simple and predictable. It should be free cash flow generative, have a dominant market position, large barriers to entry, high return on capital, limited exposure to non-controllable extrinsic risks, a strong balance sheet where outside capital is not necessary, and excellent management and good governance. And now we'll just jump one by one through the different points that he makes. So the first part is we should be looking at simple and predictable businesses. And in Phil Town's approach, this would be the meaning, or also you're looking at circle of competence, which is what you'll hear from Charlie Munger, and we'll have a little look at what he has to say about that as well later. And as you can see from the 13F I showed earlier, he's dealing in quite a lot of restaurant businesses, and those are generally fairly easy to understand. They don't have kind of complicated operations or anything like that. So this is where you'll see like Domino's or Chipotle Mexican Grill playing a role in his portfolio there. And the company should be free cash flow generative. And this sounds quite obvious, but quite a lot of companies struggle to generate free cash flow from their operations. You'll see this typically with anything that's got kind of really high capex demands. So if you're looking at automotive, obviously to build cars, you need to constantly be updating your factory equipment and things like that. And as a result, it's much more difficult for those capital intensive companies to be generating a lot of free cash flow. And here we want to see that the company is able to fund its own growth through its free cash flow without having to take on debt or give away equity in the business. And we want to see that the company has a dominant market position, and the dominant market position usually comes from the moat. So for this, we're typically looking for a durable competitive advantage which protects the company from its competition. And there's lots of different types of moats. I've made a previous video on that, so I'll leave a link to that as well. And when looking at dominant market position, we're looking for the most successful, or the couple of most successful companies in a particular industry. So in digital advertising, you might be looking at Google or Alphabet in this case, and Facebook, because they're really strong competitors in the digital advertising space. Or if we're looking at the beverage industry or food and beverage, then you might look at something like Coca-Cola and PepsiCo being 2 of the top performers in that area. And we want the competitors to have large barriers to entry. So this means that it's going to be very difficult for anyone new to enter the market. And this again relates to moat, particularly in the idea of a toll moat or a switching moat. And Phil Town will often give the example for this of Burlington Northern Railway. So if you think about it from a perspective of trying to buy the land to build a railway, obviously that was developed 150 years ago or something like that in the US. So the government is not going to allow any more right of way to build railroad tracks. So that's kind of a really strong competitive advantage, and it's actually would be impossible for a competitor to start up and get the right of way to build those tracks. And even if they did, you have to consider the amount of money they would have to spend on that infrastructure to be able to start making a profit, and the amount of money they would spend there, they would never really make a profit from that point because it would just be so expensive to build a railroad across the country. And you're also looking at companies like Google. I think it would be very difficult for someone to create a new search platform and compete with Google at this stage, just because they've become so established in this area. And the next point is looking at high return on capital. So this is really something that the management has a lot of influence over, how they allocate the capital to grow the business. A good number here is like in the mid-teens or above 20% is great for return on capital. And we also want the company to have a limited exposure to non-controllable extrinsic risks. So for this, we might be looking at a company which has got an area of quite high legislation. So for example, you might be looking at utilities companies and things like that. There might be laws that the government passes that they have no control over. And the same thing could be said for the commodities industry. If you're a housing development or building company, and particularly now as you see the rates of inflation getting higher, the cost of lumber and things like that, you really don't have any control over. So that's a kind of big risk on your side, because you're going to have to pass those costs eventually onto the customer, and that actually risks you losing business as well if you can't be competitive with the pricing. And we want to see a strong balance sheet where outside capital isn't necessary. And by strong balance sheet, we're looking for a company that's got a lot more assets than liabilities. So in an economic downturn, it's always useful to have a lot of cash on hand so you don't have to take out debt at unfavorable kind of rates of interest, which you might have seen with the cruise lines recently. So obviously in the pandemic, no one was going on cruises. So in this case, the cruise lines' money all but dried up within a few months, and they had to go back and take on a lot of debt at quite high interest rates to be able to keep the business afloat. No pun intended there. And again here, we want to see that the company can grow from the cash it produces itself without having to take on any extra debts. And finally, you want to see excellent management and good governance. So for this, we want to see that the management's aligned with the shareholders in their values. They're doing everything for the best of the company to actually be able to maintain and grow the business as well. So for this, they should be thinking about the customers, the employees, and also the shareholders. In 2009, Charlie Munger did an interview with the BBC. In this interview, he laid out the important things that he looks for when making an investment. So I thought it'd be quite good here to kind of compare and see how these things differ between Bill Ackman's and Charlie Munger's. And they're actually very similar, but there's a few differences that we'll look at here. So Charlie says we have to deal with things that we're capable of understanding. And once we're over that filter, we need to have a business with some characteristics that give us a durable competitive advantage. Then, of course, we would vastly prefer management in place with a lot of integrity and talent. Finally, no matter how wonderful it is, it's not worth an infinite price. We have to have a price that makes sense and gives a margin of safety considering the normal vicissitudes of life. So we can see there that they're quite similar between the two. And I guess probably Bill Ackman's looked quite a lot into Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger kind of developing his own style of investing as well. And the only real difference you see here is that during Bill Ackman's 8 principles, he doesn't actually mention anything to do with the price and buying at a margin of safety. Now, I would assume that he has to be doing that because that's obviously one of the key principles. If you don't buy it at a low enough price, your returns are actually going to be quite poor. And Bill Ackman actually mentioned that as soon as he veered away from any of those 8 principles, that was when he actually lost money. So this shows the importance of having a framework in place to kind of allow you to stay rational, and you're taking away the emotion from the process, which makes it a lot easier to invest. I think it's really important to develop your own checklist as well, because it needs to be something that works for you. Someone else's checklist probably is not going to work for me completely because everyone has different ways of working and things like that. But I'm trying to develop my own, and it's going to be an interesting process to see how that goes on as I get more experience with investing. So that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give us a like, and also consider subscribing to the channel as well if you haven't already. And you can click the notification bell to get notified of whenever I'm releasing new videos. And if you want to see more similar content from me, I recommend that you check out my Phil Towns 4M's approach video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.